There's something about the edge of the unknown that pulls us in, the chilling whisper of the Arctic wind, the suffocating silence of a jungle at night, the crushing weight of isolation when all hope seems lost. These are the moments that define history's greatest lost expeditions, where ordinary people faced the unimaginable and left behind stories so extraordinary they still haunt us today. Picture this: a ship trapped in ice for months, its crew slowly succumbing to hunger and cold, or a lone explorer stumbling through uncharted wilderness, every step a battle against nature's indifference. These aren't just tales of survival, they're testaments to the unyielding human spirit, to the sheer will to live when every odds says otherwise. What is it about these stories that grips us so deeply? Maybe it's the raw vulnerability they reveal, the reminder that even the most prepared, the most daring among us, can be brought to their knees by forces beyond their control. Or perhaps it's the opposite, the awe-inspiring ingenuity that emerges in the face of disaster, the kind of creativity that sparks miracles. From makeshift shelters built against blistering winds to last-ditch efforts to signal for help, these expeditions show us what happens when desperation meets determination. And the most astonishing part, many of these explorers didn't just survive, they left behind clues, journals, and lessons that would shape the future of exploration itself. So today, we're stepping into their footprints, retracing the paths of those who vanished into the unknown and, against all odds, found their way back, or left behind mysteries that still puzzle us. We'll uncover the secrets of survival hidden in their stories, the decisions that meant life or death, and the legacy of their journeys that still echoes today. This isn't just about history. It's about understanding the limits of human endurance and the resilience that lies within all of us. Because when you strip away the maps and the gear, these explorers were just people who refused to give up. And that's something worth remembering. One of history's most haunting disappearances began with confidence, even arrogance. Sir John Franklin's Arctic expedition set sail in 1845 with two state-of-the-art ships, the HMS Erebus and Terror, reinforced with iron plating and powered by steam engines, a marvel of Victorian engineering. Their mission was clear: conquer the elusive Northwest Passage, the fabled sea route through the Arctic that would connect Europe to Asia. Franklin's crew carried enough canned food to last 3 years, along with libraries, silverware, and even a hand organ for entertainment. They were prepared for everything except the unthinkable. The first warnings came from Inuit hunters who reported gaunt men dragging boats across the ice, their lips blackened with scurvy, their eyes hollow with hunger. But it wasn't until modern archaeologists uncovered the ship's wreckage and the crew's final notes that the full horror emerged. The canned food, sealed with lead solder, had slowly poisoned them. Frozen and starving, the men resorted to eating leather from their boots. Then, as desperation took hold, some turned to the unthinkable. The expedition's final days were scrawled in the margins of a naval form, a single chilling line: all well. It was anything but. What makes Franklin's story so unsettling isn't just the tragedy, it's the irony. The very technology meant to protect them became their undoing. The Arctic didn't kill them with ice or polar bears. It exposed the fragility of human preparation. Even the best plans can unravel when nature refuses to cooperate. Yet, in their darkest hours, the crew's discipline held. They meticulously recorded their position, buried their dead with care, and left clues that would one day solve the mystery. Their legacy isn't just a cautionary tale, it's a testament to dignity in the face of despair. And perhaps that's why, nearly 2 centuries later, we're still piecing together their final footsteps. The vanishing of Roanoke settlers is the kind of mystery that lingers like fog over a coastline, visible but impossible to grasp. In 1587, a group of English men, women, and children landed on Roanoke Island, eager to establish the first permanent English colony in the New World. Their governor, John White, sailed back to England for supplies, promising a swift return. But war with Spain delayed him for 3 long years. When he finally made it back, the settlement was eerily empty. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just abandoned homes, a single fence post carved with the word Croatoan, and the unsettling silence of a ghost town. Theories about their fate have spun like wildfire for centuries. Some believe the colonists integrated with the Croatoan tribe, a nearby indigenous community, pointing to later reports of light-skinned natives and European-style structures in the area. Others suggest starvation or conflict with local tribes wiped them out, though the lack of human remains makes this hard to prove. Then there are the wilder speculations: Spanish raids, supernatural forces, even a mass abduction. But the most compelling clue remains that single word, Croatoan. Was it a desperate plea for help, a hastily scribbled destination, or a red herring meant to mislead? What makes Roanoke so haunting isn't just the disappearance, it's what the colony represents. These weren't seasoned explorers but ordinary families, lured by promises of a fresh start in an unknown land. Their story mirrors countless other failed ventures where hope collided with harsh reality. Yet, unlike Franklin's doomed Arctic voyage, Roanoke offers no journals, no final messages, just silence. That absence forces us to confront how fragile human presence can be, how quickly footprints in the sand can vanish. Modern technology has reignited the search. Ground-penetrating radar, DNA testing, and archaeological digs have turned up tantalizing hints: a 16th-century ring, European pottery fragments near Croatoan sites, but no smoking gun. Maybe that's fitting. Some mysteries resist solving, not because the answers are lost, but because they're woven into the land itself, whispered in the wind through the Carolina pines. Roanoke endures not as a failure, but as a reminder. Every great exploration begins with a leap into the dark, and sometimes the dark keeps its secrets. The Amazon has swallowed countless souls, but few vanishings haunt us like that of Percy Fawcett. Unlike the frozen silence of Franklin's Arctic or the eerie emptiness of Roanoke, Fawcett's story is tangled in vines and whispers, a disappearance so complete, it's as if the jungle itself conspired to keep its secrets. In 1925, the legendary British explorer set out on his 8th expedition into the Amazon's uncharted depths, convinced he was close to finding Z, a mythical ancient city rumored to rival El Dorado in splendor. He brought only his son, Jack, and Jack's best friend, Raleigh Rimmel, vowing not to return without proof. Their last known letter, tossed to a guide headed back to civilization, contained just 12 words: "We hope to get through this region in a few days." They were never seen again. Fawcett wasn't some reckless amateur. He'd spent years mapping the Amazon's deadliest corners, earning respect and warnings from indigenous tribes. He'd survived malaria, hostile encounters, and even a spear through his chest. But this time, obsession may have clouded his judgment. He refused to take modern equipment, believing it would slow him down. Instead, he carried only machetes, a compass, and unshakable faith in Z. Some say he ignored local guides' pleas to turn back, pressing deeper into territory where even seasoned hunters feared to tread. What followed was history's most infamous search party frenzy. Over the next century, more than 100 expeditions tried to trace Fawcett's steps, and at least 20 explorers died in the attempt. Some vanished without a trace, others left behind chilling clues: a rusted nameplate, a diary entry about blue-eyed tribesmen, or bones later disproven as Fawcett's. The most haunting theory that he found Z but chose to stay, assimilating into a hidden civilization. It's a romantic idea, but the truth is likely darker. Modern anthropologists point to the Kalahari people's oral histories, which describe killing 3 white men matching Fawcett's party. According to their accounts, the strangers ignored warnings and camped near sacred land, a fatal mistake. Yet even this explanation feels incomplete. If Fawcett died there, why were no remains ever found? The Amazon doesn't just hide bodies, it dissolves them. Heat, humidity, and scavengers can erase a human presence within weeks. Fawcett's legacy isn't just a cautionary tale about obsession. It's a mirror held up to exploration itself. How much of discovery is fact and how much is fantasy? He wasn't chasing a city, he was chasing an idea, the dream that somewhere, just beyond the next bend in the river, lay proof that the uncivilized world held grandeur to rival Europe. In the end, the jungle gave him neither triumph nor closure, only mystery, and maybe that's the point. Some frontiers exist not to be conquered, but to remind us how small we really are. The promise of a shortcut can be intoxicating, especially when it shaves 200 miles off a brutal journey. That was the siren call of Hastings' Cutoff, the untested route that lured the Donner Party toward disaster in 1846. 87 men, women, and children set out from Illinois, dreaming of fertile California soil. They had wagons stuffed with heirlooms, livestock trailing behind them, and the kind of optimism that only exists before the first storm hits. What followed wasn't just a survival story, it was a slow unraveling of every illusion about human endurance. Hastings' Cutoff wasn't just difficult, it was a trap. The trailblazer who promoted it, Lansford Hastings, had never actually traveled the full route himself. The party found themselves hacking through waist-high brush in Utah's Wasatch Mountains, losing precious weeks. By the time they reached the Sierra Nevada, winter had closed in like a vise. Snowdrift swallowed their wagons whole. Oxen dropped dead in their tracks. And then the real horror began. 20 feet of snow, temperatures plunging below zero, and the grim realization that no rescue was coming until spring. What's chilling isn't just the starvation, it's how quickly societal norms collapsed. Families huddled in makeshift cabins, rationing strips of boiled oxhide. Then came the whispers about eating the dead. Some refused outright, like 25-year-old Eddie, who watched his wife and son starve rather than cross that line. Others, like the Breen family, survived by boiling bones into gelatinous soup. The starkest divide, those who saw morality as a luxury and those who clung to it as their last tether to humanity. Yet amid the horror, glimmers of ingenuity emerged. 2 men, Eddie and Stanton, staggered through the snow for help, chewing on leather straps to stay alive. 17-year-old Virginia Reed fashioned snowshoes from oxbows and rawhide, leading her siblings to safety. The survivors weren't the strongest, they were the most adaptable. The ones who could stomach unthinkable choices without losing the will to keep moving. The Donner Party's legacy isn't just a cautionary tale about shortcuts. It's a mirror held up to crisis, who we become when the food runs out, when the snow keeps falling, when the line between right and wrong blurs. Their story forces us to ask not what we'd do to survive, but what we'd refuse to do, even if it cost us everything. And that's why, nearly 2 centuries later, their names still echo through the Sierra passes, not as cautionary whispers, but as a testament to the brutal calculus of survival. Ernest Shackleton's Antarctic expedition wasn't supposed to be a survival story, it was meant to be a triumph. In 1914, he and his crew of 27 men set sail aboard the Endurance, aiming to complete the first land crossing of Antarctica. But the pack ice had other plans. Just miles from their destination, the ship became trapped, its wooden hull groaning under the pressure of the frozen ocean. For 10 months they drifted helplessly, watching as the ice slowly crushed their home into splinters. Yet what could have been a death sentence became one of history's most astonishing feats of leadership. Shackleton's genius wasn't just in his planning, it was in his understanding of human nature. Stranded on the ice with dwindling supplies, he knew despair could kill faster than the cold. So he turned routine into ritual. Every morning, the men gathered for hoosh, a thin stew of seal meat and biscuits served with strict equality. Scientists scrubbed dishes alongside sailors. Officers slept in the same cramped tents as the crew. Shackleton cancelled rank to forge unity, even insisting his men call him boss instead of sir. It was a subtle shift, but it mattered. In a place where time lost all meaning, he gave them structure, scientific lectures, soccer matches on the ice, even a dog team to care for. These weren't distractions, they were lifelines. When the Endurance finally sank, swallowed by the ice in November 1915, the real test began. With 3 lifeboats and scant supplies, Shackleton faced an impossible choice: stay and risk starvation, or brave 800 miles of open ocean to reach help. What followed was a masterclass in adaptability. For 5 months they camped on drifting ice floes, praying the current would carry them closer to land. When the ice beneath them cracked, they rode through hurricane-force winds, dodging icebergs in 22-foot boats not built for such seas. Miraculously, they reached Elephant Island, a barren rock where survival still hung by a thread. Here, Shackleton made his boldest move. Leaving 22 men behind, he and 5 others set off in the James Caird, a lifeboat retrofitted with scraps of wood and seal blood for caulk. Their target, South Georgia Island, a speck of land 16 days away across the world's most treacherous waters. They navigated by sextant through fog and sleet, their fingers too numb to grip the ropes. When they finally landed, they still had to cross uncharted glaciers on foot, 36 hours without sleep, their boots frozen to their feet. And then, the unthinkable, every man was rescued. Not one life lost. Shackleton's leadership hinged on 2 unshakable rules. Optimism was mandatory, and no man was expendable. When a crew member collapsed from heart failure during the glacier crossing, Shackleton insisted they rest, even as storms howled around them. When he reached a whaling station and borrowed a ship to retrieve his men, he turned back 3 times, once within sight of Elephant Island because the ice was too thick. He'd rather fail than gamble with their lives. The lesson of the Endurance isn't just about grit. It's about the power of a leader who refuses to see his people as sacrifices. Shackleton didn't just bring his men home, he brought them back whole, their dignity intact. In the face of nature's indifference, he proved that the strongest tool for survival isn't supplies or strength, but the unbreakable bond between those who refuse to give up on each other. That's why his story still burns bright, not as a tale of conquest, but as a beacon of what humanity can achieve when we choose to carry one another through the storm. The night of February 1st, 1959, should have been ordinary for Igor Dyatlov and his 8 fellow hikers. They were seasoned mountaineers, students from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, trained to handle the brutal Russian winter. Their campsite on the eastern slope of Kalahari, translated as Dead Mountain, was carefully chosen, their tent pitched with military precision, but something went terribly wrong. When search teams found the tent days later, it had been slashed open from the inside, as if the occupants had fled in pure terror. Footprints led away into the snow, some barefoot, others clad in a single sock. None of it made sense. The bodies told an even darker story. Some were found clustered together, their hands burned as if they'd tried to climb a tree for shelter. Others lay alone, ribs and skulls shattered by what forensic experts later called an overwhelming force. One hiker was missing her tongue. There were no signs of struggle, no animal tracks, just a silent, frozen landscape holding its secrets tight. The Soviet Union, already paranoid in the Cold War's grip, classified the files immediately. Rumors spread like wildfire, secret weapons tests, infrasound-induced panic, even UFOs. But the truth, it vanished with the hikers. What makes Dyatlov Pass so unnerving isn't just the violence, it's the absence of a clear villain. Avalanche theories gained traction in recent years, suggesting a rare slab avalanche could explain the trauma. But why would experienced hikers who'd survived far steeper slopes flee half-dressed into -30-degree cold? Others point to katabatic winds, sudden gusts so powerful they mimic explosions. Then there's the radiation. Some clothing showed traces enough to fuel speculation about covert military experiments in the nearby wilderness. Yet the most haunting detail isn't in the evidence, it's in the silence. These weren't reckless amateurs but methodical explorers who logged every detail in diaries. Their final photos show laughter around a campfire, unaware they were hours from becoming one of history's greatest enigmas. Perhaps that's why the case endures, not because it defies explanation, but because it reminds us how quickly the familiar can twist into the inexplicable. The mountains don't just hide dangers, they erase logic, leaving only questions carved in ice. Modern expeditions still trek to Dyatlov Pass, armed with drones and ground-penetrating radar, hoping technology can solve what time has obscured. But some mysteries resist dissection. The Urals keep their secrets wrapped in snow and wind, whispering a chilling lesson. Nature's most terrifying force isn't its brutality, but its refusal to explain itself. And sometimes the unknown lingers not because we haven't looked hard enough, but because some truths are swallowed by the wild forever. The Kalahari Desert stretches like a vast, sun-bleached canvas, a place where the horizon shimmers with heat and the land keeps its secrets close. So when explorer Guillermo Farini emerged from its depths in 1885 with tales of a ruined city half buried in the sand, the world leaned in. He described crumbling walls, strange carvings, and the eerie sense that something grand had once thrived where only dunes now rolled. His account set off a fevered dream of speculation. Was this the remnants of a forgotten civilization, a phantom city swallowed by time, or something far more slippery, a mirage of the mind? Farini wasn't some wide-eyed amateur. A former tightrope walker turned adventurer, he'd navigated the deserts of southern Africa with a showman's flair and a survivor's grit. His detailed sketches and descriptions lent credibility to his claims. Arches worn smooth by wind, stone blocks fitted together with precision, even what he swore were ancient inscriptions. Yet when later expeditions retraced his steps, they found nothing but endless sand. Skeptics called it a hoax, a fabrication to sell books. Others wondered if the desert itself had conspired to hide the truth, shifting its sands to bury the city once more. But lost cities have a way of haunting us. The idea that somewhere, just beyond the edge of the known, lie the bones of a civilization waiting to be rediscovered. It's a siren song that's drawn explorers for centuries. From El Dorado to Atlantis, these legends tap into something primal, the thrill of the undiscovered, the chance to rewrite history with a single find. What makes Farini's story unique isn't just the mystery of whether his city existed. It's the way it exposes how easily the lines between discovery and delusion can blur in the extremes. Modern technology has only deepened the intrigue. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar have revealed anomalies in the Kalahari geometric shapes that don't match natural formations, hints of structures beneath the sand. Could these be echoes of Farin's ruins or mere tricks of light and geology? Even the local San people, whose ancestors have lived in the region for millennia, speak of ancient places lost to time, their stories passed down like fragments of a puzzle missing half its pieces. Perhaps the truth doesn't matter as much as the hunt. The Kalahari's phantom city endures not because it's been found, but because it hasn't. It's a reminder that our world still holds pockets of mystery, places where the map still reads, "Here be dragons." Farin's legacy isn't just a cautionary tale about tall tales, it's an invitation to look at a blank spot on the map and wonder, what if, and sometimes that's enough to keep the search alive. The Australian outback is a place of extremes, endless red deserts under a blistering sun, rivers that vanish into dust, and nights so cold they steal the breath from your lungs. It's a land that demands respect, patience, and an understanding honed over generations. Yet when Robert Burke and William Wills set out in 1860 to become the first men to cross the continent from south to north, they carried something far more dangerous than ambition: arrogance. Burke, a police superintendent with no exploration experience, was chosen to lead the Victorian exploring expedition, not for his wilderness skills, but for his connections. Wills, the group's surveyor, was meticulous but overshadowed by Burke's impulsiveness. Their team was lavishly equipped camels imported from India, enough supplies to fill a small ship, even a cedar dining table for their base camp. What they lacked was any real grasp of the land they aimed to conquer. The first cracks appeared quickly. Burke split the party, leaving slower-moving supply wagons behind to race ahead with a smaller group. When they reached Cooper Creek, a vital water source, he ignored the advice of local Aboriginal people who'd survived there for thousands of years. Instead of waiting for the rest of his team as planned, Burke grew impatient. After just 4 months, he left a note buried in a cache, then pushed north with Wills and 2 others, believing they could cross hundreds of miles of unknown terrain and return before the creek dried up. It was a gamble with no margin for error. The journey to the Gulf of Carpentaria was brutal but successful. On paper, they'd done it, traversed the continent. But the return trip became a nightmare. Rains flooded the plains, turning the land into a swamp. Their camels bogged down, supplies ran low. By the time they staggered back to Cooper Creek, emaciated and exhausted, they found the camp abandoned. The support party had left just hours earlier, after waiting an extra month beyond the agreed-upon time. The note Burke had buried to mark their passage went unseen. What happened next was a slow unraveling of hope. Burke, Wills, and their companion John King tried to follow the creek downstream, surviving on nardoo, a fern whose seeds required careful preparation to avoid poisoning. The local Yandruwand, her people tried to help, showing them how to process the plant properly, but pride and mistrust won out. Burke, convinced the Aboriginal people were a threat, drove them away, cutting off their last lifeline. Weeks later, Will scribbled a final diary entry. "We are trying to live the best way we can." King, the sole survivor, was found months later living with the Yandruwandha, who'd taken him in despite everything. The tragedy of Burke and Wills isn't just about poor planning or bad luck. It's a collision of 2 worlds, one that moved with the land and one that tried to force it into submission. The expedition's fatal flaw wasn't lack of gear or courage. It was the refusal to listen to those who knew the country best. While the explorers starved, the Yandruwandha thrived on the same land, using knowledge passed down for generations. Today, their story lingers as a cautionary tale etched into Australia's national memory. Monuments stand in Melbourne, but the real lesson isn't carved in stone. It's written in the dust of Cooper Creek. Exploration isn't just about conquering the unknown, it's about humility, because the land doesn't care how many camels you bring or how fancy your equipment is. It only reveals its secrets to those willing to learn. Imagine a machine so audacious it looked like it belonged in a science fiction novel. A 60-foot-long, 30-ton behemoth on gargantuan tires, designed to conquer the harshest continent on Earth. This was the Antarctic snow cruiser, a marvel of 1930s engineering that promised to revolutionize polar exploration. Built by the visionary team behind Chicago's Century of Progress exhibition, it boasted living quarters, a machine shop, even an airplane on its roof. The press dubbed it Penguin One, and its creators vowed it would glide across Antarctica's icy wastes like a ship sailing smooth seas. But the moment its wheels touched snow, the dream unraveled. The first warning came in Boston, where the cruiser's sheer weight snapped a bridge during a test drive. Repairs were rushed, and by the time it reached Antarctica, the team was already behind schedule. Then came the ice. Those massive tires designed to grip spun helplessly on the slick surface. The cruiser's engines overheated within minutes. In a desperate bid to move forward, the crew tried driving it backward, only to bury it up to its axles in soft snow. For weeks, they hacked at the ice with picks, rigged makeshift bridges, and even used the onboard airplane to tow the vehicle. Nothing worked. The snow cruiser, a symbol of human ingenuity, was defeated by the very terrain it was built to master. Abandoned in November 1940, the cruiser became a ghost of the ice. A later expedition found it buried under snow, its interior eerily preserved, canned food still on shelves, tools neatly stowed. They marked its location with bamboo poles, assuming it would be easy to find again. But when scientists returned in the 1950s, the poles stood alone. The cruiser had vanished, no tracks, no debris, no trace. Some say shifting snow buried it hundreds of feet deep. Others whisper that the ice sheet, always in motion, swallowed it whole, carrying it slowly toward the sea. What makes the snow cruiser's fate so compelling isn't just its disappearance, it's the irony of its legacy. This wasn't some flimsy contraption. It was built by brilliant minds who'd mastered skyscrapers and highways. Yet Antarctica treated their masterpiece like a child's toy left in the yard. The cruiser's story mirrors so many doomed expeditions, the gap between what we think we can control and what nature allows. Today, its wreck might lie preserved under the ice, a frozen time capsule of ambition. Or perhaps it's already been ground to dust by glaciers, its metal bones scattered across the ocean floor. Either way, it stands as a monument to the humbling truth that no matter how advanced our machines, the wild always gets the last word. Amelia Earhart's final flight began with the kind of boldness that defined her life, a refusal to accept boundaries, whether imposed by society or geography. In 1937, she set out to become the first woman to circumnavigate the globe by air, a journey that would cover 29,000 miles. Her Lockheed Electra, loaded with extra fuel tanks and navigational equipment, was a flying laboratory of cutting-edge technology for its time, but the Pacific Ocean, vast and indifferent, had other plans. On July 2nd, just after takeoff from Lee, New Guinea, Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, vanished somewhere near Howland Island, a speck of land barely visible from the air. The last radio transmission was calm, almost routine. "We are running north and south." Then silence. Theories about their fate have spiraled for decades, each more tantalizing than the last. Some believe the Electra simply ran out of fuel, plunging into the sea after a missed rendezvous with a U.S. Coast Guard cutter. Others point to scattered radio signals picked up in the days after distress calls that may have been hoaxes or genuine cries for help from a stranded Earhart. Then there's the darker twist, claims she was captured by the Japanese, who allegedly mistook her for a spy. Witnesses on Saipan reported seeing a white woman in custody, and a photo from the era, later debunked, fueled speculation for years. But the most compelling clues lie beneath the waves. In 2019, a team searching near Nicumaroro, an uninhabited atoll, found aluminum fragments matching the Electra's unique construction. Even more haunting, bones discovered there in 1940, initially dismissed as male, were later reanalyzed and found to match Earhart's proportions. The tides around Nicumaroro are treacherous, with swells that could have dragged wreckage into deep water within hours. If the Electra did crash there, the ocean may have swallowed it whole, leaving only whispers behind. What makes Earhart's disappearance so magnetic isn't just the mystery, it's what she represented. In an era when women were told their place was anywhere but the cockpit, she soared higher and farther than anyone thought possible. Her legacy isn't just about aviation, it's about defiance. Every time someone scans a sonar image of the Pacific floor or pores over radio logs from the 1930s, they're not just searching for wreckage. They're chasing the shadow of a woman who refused to let the sky or the sea have the final word. And perhaps that's why, after all these years, we still lean in when new evidence surfaces. It's not just about solving a puzzle, it's about honoring the spirit of someone who taught us that the greatest frontiers aren't just physical. They're the limits we dare to push, the fears we choose to face, and the legacy we leave when we vanish into the unknown. Amelia didn't just fly, she ignited a flame that still burns, reminding us that some journeys don't end with a landing. They become legends. The Arctic has a way of turning ambition into ice, slowly, relentlessly, without mercy. When the U.S.S. Jeanette set sail from San Francisco in July 1879, its crew brimmed with the confidence of the Gilded Age. Funded by newspaper tycoon James Gordon Bennett Jr., the ship was a floating fortress of oak and iron, equipped with the latest scientific instruments and enough provisions for years. Commander George DeLong, a seasoned naval officer, aimed to reach the North Pole via the Bering Strait, convinced an open polar sea lay beyond the ice. But the Arctic doesn't reward conviction. It only answers to patience. By September, the Jeanette was locked in ice near Herald Island, its hull groaning under the pressure. At first, the crew treated it as a temporary setback. They organized theatrical performances, celebrated holidays with feasts, and dutifully recorded weather data. But as months stretched into years, the ice refused to release them. The ship drifted helplessly northwest, a speck in a frozen wasteland. By June 1881, the pressure became too much. The Jeanette's timbers splintered, and within hours it vanished beneath the ice, leaving 33 men stranded on a floe with 3 small boats and dwindling supplies. What followed was a march of pure desperation. Dragging their boats across jagged ice, the crew battled frostbite, starvation, and hallucinations. Some succumbed quietly, curling up in the snow to never wake. Others fought until the end, like engineer George Melville, who led a group through a blizzard with only a pocket compass. When they finally reached open water, the ordeal wasn't over. A storm separated the boats, casting DeLong's group onto the barren Lena Delta. Their final days were scribbled in a waterlogged journal. October 30th, all hands suffering. By the time rescuers found them, only Melville's party had survived. Yet the Jeanette's legacy isn't just tragedy. The crew's meticulous records of their drift provided the first hard evidence of the transpolar current, a revelation that reshaped Arctic science. Their crushed ship had become an accidental experiment, proving the ice moved in predictable patterns, knowledge that would later guide explorers like Fridtjof Nansen. Even their deaths held meaning. The Inuit who found DeLong's body preserved his journal, ensuring their story didn't vanish with them. Sometimes progress isn't forged in triumph, but in the quiet moments between surrender and perseverance. The Jeanette's crew didn't reach the pole, but their suffering mapped the way for those who followed. In the end, the ice took their lives, but not their purpose. The Arctic gives nothing freely, but if you pay the price, it might just yield a secret or two. The Atlantic Ocean was calm on that December morning in 1872, when the crew of the Dei Gratia spotted a ship drifting aimlessly near the Azores. Its sails were tattered, its deck eerily still, no shouts, no movement, not even the creak of rigging in the wind. As they boarded the vessel, the mystery deepened. The Mary Celeste was fully provisioned, barrels of food and water untouched, the crew's personal belongings still in their quarters, even a pot of tea left to cool in the galley. But the 10 people who'd been aboard were gone without a trace. What makes the Mary Celeste so haunting isn't just the absence of its crew, it's the surreal normalcy left behind. The ship's logbook lay open on the captain's desk, its final entry dated 9 days earlier with no hint of distress. A single lifeboat was missing, but why abandon a perfectly seaworthy vessel? The cargo, over 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, remained intact, ruling out piracy or mutiny. Even the ship's cat, usually a steadfast companion, had vanished. It was as if the crew had simply evaporated into the salt air. Theories have swirled for over a century, each more tantalizing than the last. Some point to the alcohol cargo, suggesting fumes may have ignited, causing a panic that drove the crew overboard. Others speculate about waterspouts or rogue waves, though the Mary Celeste showed no signs of significant damage. Then there's the darker twist. Whispers of insurance fraud or even a mutiny gone wrong, though no evidence of violence was ever found. Even Arthur Conan Doyle, years before creating Sherlock Holmes, couldn't resist spinning a fictional tale of murder and vengeance around the ship, a testament to how deeply the mystery captivated the public imagination. Modern science has offered new clues. Researchers now suspect a rare phenomenon called a methane bubble could explain the crew's sudden flight. In certain parts of the ocean, trapped methane can erupt from the seabed, reducing water density so drastically that ships lose buoyancy. A blast of gas could also intoxicate or asphyxiate a crew, prompting them to abandon ship in terror only to watch helplessly as the vessel, now vented, sailed on without them. It's a plausible theory, but like all others, it remains just that, a theory. The Mary Celeste's legacy isn't just about unanswered questions. It's a mirror held up to our fear of the unexplained. The sea has always been a place of both wonder and dread, where logic can dissolve like foam on the waves. This wasn't some ancient mariner's legend. It was a real ship with real people, vanishing into the ordinary daylight of a calm sea. And that's what chills us most, not the storm, not the monsters of the deep, but the quiet moment when a dozen lives stepped off the edge of the known world, leaving behind only a ghost ship and a mystery that refuses to sink. France had pinned its hopes on Jean-François de la Pérouse. Handpicked by King Louis XVI himself, this seasoned naval officer was tasked with completing what Captain Cook had started: mapping the uncharted edges of the Pacific. His 2 ships, the Astrolabe and the Bowsole, were floating laboratories stuffed with scientists, artists, and enough supplies for 4 years at sea. When they sailed from Brest in 1785, it wasn't just an expedition, it was a statement. Europe watched, expecting triumph. Instead, the ocean swallowed them whole. The last confirmed sighting came in January 1788, when British ships anchored at Botany Bay watched La Pérouse's vessels vanish into the horizon. After that, silence. Years passed with no word, and by 1791, France sent a rescue mission. They scoured the Pacific, finding nothing but whispers, tales from islanders of white men shipwrecked on distant reefs, fragments of European tools traded along coastal villages. But the truth remained buried beneath layers of rumor and time. Then, in 1826, an Irish trader stumbled upon the quay. Off the coast of Vanikoro in the Solomon Islands, he spotted bronze cannons half buried in the sand, their French insignia still visible beneath decades of coral. Later expeditions found more: compasses, porcelain, even a shattered ship's bell. The locals spoke of two great ships torn apart by a storm generations earlier. Some survivors, they said, had built a smaller boat from the wreckage and sailed away, but where, no one knew. The real tragedy of La Pérouse's expedition isn't just its disappearance. It's how close they came to immortality. His journals, recovered from Russia where they'd been sent overland before the disaster, revealed meticulous records of Alaskan glaciers, Hawaiian villages, and the foggy coasts of California. These weren't just maps, they were windows into worlds Europe had never seen. Had he returned, his name might have eclipsed Cook's. Instead, his legacy became a cautionary tale about the Pacific's fickle nature, a reminder that no amount of preparation can outmatch a storm's fury or the slow creep of starvation on an uncharted shore. Modern archaeologists still comb Vanikoro's waters, piecing together the final hours. Did the ships collide in the night? Were survivors killed by hostile tribes or claimed by disease? The ocean guards its secrets well, but perhaps La Pérouse's greatest lesson isn't in how he vanished, but in how he sailed, with curiosity, not conquest, as his compass. His mission wasn't just to claim lands for a king, but to understand them, and in that, even in failure, he succeeded. The cannons on the seafloor aren't just relics of a doomed voyage. They're markers of the moment exploration shifted from taking to learning, a legacy as enduring as the tides. The hunt for Franklin's lost expedition became its own kind of obsession, one that lured rescuers into the same icy jaws that had claimed their quarry. At least 30 separate missions set out between 1847 and 1859, funded by the British Admiralty, Lady Franklin's relentless private fortune, and even American magnates like Henry Grinnell. Yet the Arctic, indifferent to human intention, swallowed many of these would-be saviors whole. The search for the lost became its own graveyard. Take Captain Robert McClure's HMS Investigator, sent in 1850 to trace Franklin's probable route through the Northwest Passage. Trapped in ice for 3 brutal years, McClure's crew survived on dwindling rations and sheer stubbornness. They eventually abandoned ship, staggering across the ice to be rescued by another search vessel, only for the Investigator itself to vanish, its wreck rediscovered in 2010, perfectly preserved in the frigid depths. Then there was the ill-fated voyage of the Erebus and Terror's sister ship, the HMS Breadalbane, crushed by ice in 1853 while searching for Franklin. It sank so fast that survivors described it as a sheet of paper crumpled in a fist, leaving just a handful of men to drift on floes for days before rescue. Even more chilling were the fates of those who stumbled upon traces of Franklin's men. Leopold McClintock's team found skeletal remains in 1859, some with flesh still clinging to bone, arranged in poses that hinted at cannibalism, a revelation so shocking, Victorian England suppressed the details for decades. The Inuit shared stories of white men who ate each other, passed down through generations, but these accounts were dismissed as folklore until forensic science confirmed them over a century later. The searchers hadn't just failed to bring Franklin's crew home, they'd unearthed horrors that shattered the era's myths of heroic exploration. What makes these secondary tragedies so haunting is their inevitability. The Arctic didn't discriminate between those who sought glory and those who sought the lost. Ice doesn't care about motives, yet amid the carnage, these failed missions reshaped history. McClure's ordeal technically completed the Northwest Passage, though he walked part of it instead of sailing. The searchers produced the first detailed maps of the Canadian Arctic, and the grim discoveries forced navies to abandon wooden ships for steel. Every frozen corpse, every abandoned journal became a stepping stone toward understanding the polar frontier. The cruelest irony, Franklin's ships, the Erebus and Terror, were finally found in 2014 and 2016, not by any grand expedition, but through Inuit oral histories that led archaeologists to their resting places. The very people Victorian explorers had ignored held the answers all along. The lost search parties had circled the truth for decades, blinded by the same arrogance that doomed Franklin. The Arctic didn't just swallow men, it swallowed pride, leaving behind a lesson etched in ice. Sometimes the greatest discoveries come when we stop assuming we know where to look. The moment Henry Morton Stanley uttered those now immortal words, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume," history froze in a single, cinematic instant. Two men, surrounded by the dense jungles of Ujiji near Lake Tanganyika, one a missing missionary explorer, the other a brash journalist on assignment. David Livingstone had been lost to the world for 6 years, presumed dead by many, his letters and journals piling up in unopened crates back in London. Stanley's expedition, funded by the New York Herald, was less a rescue mission and more a publicity stunt until it became something far more complicated. Livingstone wasn't just surviving, he was thriving in his own way. Though weakened by malaria and dysentery, he'd embedded himself in local communities, mapping rivers and documenting the horrors of the East African slave trade. He had no interest in being saved. Stanley, however, saw the story of a lifetime. His dispatches back to America painted Livingstone as a frail hero clinging to life, a narrative that ignored the truth. Livingstone had chosen to stay. The two men spent months together, but their partnership was uneasy. Stanley the showman, Livingstone the purist, both tangled in the same colonial web. What happened next reveals the dark undercurrent of such reunions. Stanley returned to Europe a celebrity, using his fame to launch his own expeditions, ones that would later enable King Leopold II's brutal exploitation of the Congo. Livingstone, meanwhile, refused to leave Africa, dying 2 years later in a remote village, his loyal attendants carrying his embalmed body and notes across the continent to ensure they reached Britain. The irony was thick. Stanley's rescue had accelerated colonial greed, while Livingstone's death cemented his legacy as a man who truly understood the land he'd wandered. The legend of their meeting obscures harder truths. Survival stories are rarely just about endurance, they are about who gets to tell them and why. Stanley's version sold newspapers. Livingstone's diaries, published posthumously, exposed the suffering he'd witnessed. Both men became symbols, but of vastly different things, one of conquest, the other of conscience. Their story reminds us that even the most celebrated reunions can cast long, complicated shadows. And sometimes the most profound survival isn't physical, it's the survival of truth, waiting patiently to be uncovered. The Yukon in winter is a kingdom of silence, a place where the cold doesn't just bite, it suffocates. So when Inspector Francis Fitzgerald and his 3-man Royal Northwest Mounted Police Patrol set out from Fort McPherson in December 1910, they knew the risks. Their mission was straightforward: track down a fugitive named Alacomiac, accused of murder, and bring him to justice. But the wilderness doesn't care about justice. It only cares about survival. What began as a routine 2-week journey quickly spiraled into a nightmare. Temperatures plunged to 60 below zero, turning the air into a blade. The patrol's sled dogs, weakened by hunger, collapsed one by one. Their food supply dwindled, forcing them to ration a few strips of frozen fish per day. Then the unthinkable happened. They missed a crucial turn on the Peel River, adding 70 extra miles to their route. In the Yukon, 70 miles might as well be 700. By January, the men were shadows, frostbite gnawed at their fingers and toes, exhaustion blurred their thoughts. Constable Sam Carter, the youngest of the group, scrawled a final diary entry. Still no sign of the fort. All very weak, God help us. Days later, Carter became the first to succumb. The others pressed on, dragging their sled through waist-deep snow until their legs refused to move. When a search party finally found their bodies in March, the scene was a tableau of quiet horror. Fitzgerald lay curled beside a dead fire, his pistol nearby, one bullet spent. Had it been a signal shot or something darker, the Lost Patrol's tragedy wasn't just about cold or starvation. It was about the slow erosion of hope. These weren't inexperienced men. Fitzgerald was a legend, having survived decades in the Arctic, but the land doesn't respect reputation. What makes their story haunting isn't the failure, it's the dignity in their final acts. They'd carefully buried their journals in a tin can, ensuring the truth wouldn't die with them. They'd even stacked their remaining supplies neatly, as if preparing for the next patrol. Today, their graves near Fort McPherson are marked by simple wooden crosses, a stark contrast to the epic scale of their sacrifice. The Yukon didn't just take their lives, it erased their footsteps, their voices, everything but the lesson they left behind. In the end, the Mounties didn't fail. The wilderness simply remembered what we so often forget, that no amount of courage can bend nature to our will. Some battles aren't won or lost, they're endured until the last breath. The summit of Mount Everest has always been more than just a point on a map. It's a symbol of the human spirit's relentless drive to push beyond the possible. And no story captures that drive, and it's cost more hauntingly than George Mallory's final climb in 1924. When asked why he wanted to conquer Everest, Mallory famously replied, "Because it's there." Those 3 words became a mantra for explorers everywhere. But when Mallory and his climbing partner, Andrew Irvine, vanished just 800 vertical feet from the summit, they left behind a mystery that still taunts us today. Did they make it to the top before the mountain claimed them? Decades later, in 1999, a team of climbers stumbled upon Mallory's body, frozen in time on Everest's north face. His remains told a silent story, his sun-bleached shirt, his hobnailed boots, the frayed rope still around his waist. But the most tantalizing clue was what wasn't there, the photograph of his wife, Ruth, which he'd vowed to place on the summit. Had he reached the peak and lost it on the descent, or had it fallen from his pocket during his final, desperate climb? The absence of Irvine's body and their missing camera, which could have held proof of their triumph, only deepened the enigma. Everest experts have dissected every scrap of evidence. Some point to Mallory's makeshift oxygen apparatus, arguing its crude design would have failed at higher altitudes. Others cite his injured foot, wondering if he could have pushed through the pain to summit. Then there's the infamous second step, a near-vertical rock face that later climbers assumed Mallory couldn't have scaled without modern gear, until a modern mountaineer climbed it in replica clothing, proving it was possible. But possibility isn't proof. What makes Mallory's story so enduring isn't just the unanswered question. It's what his disappearance represents, the fine line between legend and oblivion. Every climber who summits Everest today does so standing on the shoulders of those like Mallory, who ventured into the unknown with little more than wool coats and sheer grit. The mountain hasn't gotten any safer. Over 300 bodies still lie where they fell, grim reminders of Everest's indifference. But Mallory's legacy isn't just about conquest. It's about the allure of the unanswered, the idea that somewhere in the thin air and howling winds, the truth still waits, frozen in time, and perhaps that's why we keep looking. Not to prove he summited, but to remind ourselves that some dreams are worth chasing, even if they vanish into the clouds. the ice didn't just trap the Kalahari, it toyed with her. When renowned explorer Vilhjalmur Stefansson's flagship became lodged in the Arctic pack ice off Alaska's coast in August 1913, it should have been a temporary setback. But the Kalahari wasn't just stuck, she was at the mercy of currents dragging her westward into uncharted waters. Stefansson, ever the pragmatist, made a fateful decision. He left. Taking 5 men on a supposed hunting trip, he abandoned the ship and its 22 remaining crew members to their fate. His parting words, "Don't worry, I'll be back in 10 days." They'd never see him again. What followed was a slow-motion disaster. By January, the ice crushed the Kalahari's hull like an eggshell, forcing Captain Robert Bartlett and his men onto the frozen sea with barely enough supplies to last a month. The Arctic night stretched endlessly, temperatures plunging to 50 below zero, but the cold was only part of the nightmare. Without Stefansson's leadership, the crew fractured into factions. Some wanted to march toward land immediately. Others insisted they stay near the wreckage, hoping for rescue. The ship's anthropologist, Henry Buchat, openly challenged Bartlett's authority, arguing they should wait for spring. It was a deadly miscalculation. Bartlett, a veteran of Robert Peary's polar expeditions, knew hesitation meant death. He organized teams to hunt seals and polar bears, turning their hides into makeshift boots and parkamas. When Buchat and 3 others stubbornly tried to strike out alone, they vanished within days, their footprints ending abruptly at the edge of thin ice. The message was clear. In the Arctic, unity wasn't just preferable, it was survival. The remaining crew's journey to Wrangel Island became a masterclass in adaptation. They transformed sleds into boats when they hit open water, repurposed tin cans as cooking pots, and even used pages from scientific notebooks to insulate their boots. But the true test came after reaching land. With food nearly gone, Bartlett made an agonizing choice. He'd take 1 man and the strongest dogs to cross 700 miles of frozen sea to Siberia for help. For the 8 left behind, mostly scientists with no wilderness experience, every day became a battle against despair. Months passed. The castaways survived on dwindling seal blubber and the occasional fox, their bodies ravaged by scurvy. When rescue finally came in September 1914, only half were alive. The survivors' accounts revealed a chilling truth. Those who lived weren't the strongest, but the most adaptable. The ship's steward, Bjarne Mayman, kept morale afloat by playing the accordion until his fingers froze. The cook, Robert Williamson, turned meager rations into communal feasts, understanding full bellies meant warmer bodies. The Kalahari's legacy isn't just a tale of poor leadership and endurance. It's a blueprint for what works and what doesn't when civilization falls away. Stefansson's abandonment proved that in the Arctic, loyalty matters more than titles. Bartlett's desperate trek showed that action, even against impossible odds, beats passive hope. And those left behind, they demonstrated that survival isn't about individual strength, but the fragile web of shared purpose. The ice took their ship, their comrades, even their dignity, but not their will to outlast it. In the end, that's all that mattered. The cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde stand silent and empty, their stone walls holding secrets whispered only by the wind. Around 1300 AD, the ancestral Pueblones, often called the Anasazi, walked away from their towering homes carved into the cliffs, leaving behind pottery still stacked in corners, tools resting where they were last used, even the remains of meals half-eaten. It was as if an entire civilization simply stepped out one day and never returned. But why? The answer lies tangled in dust, drought, and the fragile balance between humans and the land they call home. For centuries, the ancestral Pueblones thrived in the arid Southwest, mastering the art of survival in a place where water was more precious than gold. They built intricate networks of reservoirs and canals, grew maize in terraced fields, and stored harvests in granaries high above the ground, safe from rodents and raiders. Their settlements weren't just functional. They were works of art, multi-story structures hugging canyon walls like swallows' nests, painted with symbols that still baffle archaeologists today. Then, almost overnight, it all ended. The great houses emptied, the fires went cold. Theories about their disappearance stretch as wide as the desert horizon. Some point to a decades-long drought that gripped the region, turning already scarce water sources to dust. Tree rings tell a story of relentless dry spells, years where the rains never came and crops withered in the fields. Others argue it wasn't just the climate overpopulation and deforestation may have stripped the land bare, leaving it unable to support the bustling communities that once flourished there. Then there's the darker possibility of conflict. Scorched walls and scattered arrowheads hint at violence, perhaps raids from neighboring groups or internal strife as resources dwindled. But the most haunting theory isn't about collapse, it's about transformation. The ancestral Pueblones didn't vanish, they adapted. Oral histories from modern Pueblo tribes suggest their ancestors migrated south and east, joining other communities and weaving their knowledge into new ways of life. The stone cities weren't abandoned so much as outgrown, left behind like outworn clothing as people moved toward rivers and valleys that could sustain them. If true, their legacy isn't one of failure but resilience, a lesson in knowing when to hold on and when to let go. Yet the mystery lingers. Walking through Mesa Verde today, you can't shake the feeling of interrupted lives. A child's sandal lying where it was dropped, a painted handprint on a wall, fingers outstretched as if reaching through time. These weren't people who planned to leave, they expected to come back. That's what chills us most, not the grand collapses of history, but the quiet moments when a door is left ajar, a fire banked for the night, and no one ever returns to stir the embers. The ancestral Pueblones remind us that even the most rooted civilizations are just guests in the land's long story, and sometimes the land asks for its home back. The dense Teutoburg forest had seen rain for days, a relentless downpour that turned the narrow paths to mud and weighed down the armor of 17,000 Roman soldiers marching in perfect formation. Their commander, Publius Quinctilius Varus, had no reason to fear the terrain. He'd governed these Germanic lands for years, believing them pacified. Even the presence of Arminius, a trusted Germanic officer in Rome's ranks, didn't raise suspicion. But alliances in the wilderness are as fragile as autumn leaves. By the time Varus realized the trap, it was too late. The ambush erupted from nowhere. Germanic warriors, hidden among the dripping trees, hurled javelins into the Roman flanks while others toppled logs to block retreat. The narrow forest paths, ideal for maintaining discipline in open battle, became death traps. Legionaries stumbled over each other in the mud, their heavy shields useless in the close quarters. Arminius the turncoat had spent years studying Roman tactics. Now he exploited every weakness. For 3 days, the slaughter continued. When the dust settled, 3 entire legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, had been erased from existence. Rome's greatest military disaster wasn't just a defeat, it was a reckoning. For centuries, the battlefield's exact location remained a mystery, lost to time and the forest's relentless growth. Then, in the 1980s, a British amateur archaeologist named Tony Clun made a discovery that rewrote history. Metal detectors near Calcris Hill unearthed a trove of Roman artifacts, bent swords, dented helmets, even coins minted before 9 AD, all clustered in a grim trail. Excavations revealed bones buried in chaotic heaps, some with Germanic spearheads still lodged between ribs. The most chilling find, a field of pits where the victors had dumped the dead. their skeletons still bearing the marks of ritual mutilation, skulls split open, limbs severed. This wasn't just a battle, it was a message carved in flesh. What makes Teutoburg so pivotal isn't just the scale of the loss, it's how the defeat reshaped an empire. Emperor Augustus, upon hearing the news, reportedly wandered his palace crying, "Varus, give me back my legions." Rome never again attempted to conquer Germania beyond the Rhine. The river became a psychological border, a line drawn not by geography but by collective trauma. The Germanic tribes, once seen as barbarians to be civilized, became untouchable, a warning etched into Roman strategy for centuries. Yet the forest keeps its secrets. Recent excavations suggest the battle was actually a series of scattered skirmishes across miles, a guerrilla campaign that bled the legions dry. Arminius didn't just defeat Rome, he outthought them, turning their own roads into killing grounds. The real horror of Teutoburg lies in its intimacy. This wasn't a clash of faceless armies, but thousands of individual terrors. A legionary drowning in a rain-filled ditch. A centurion realizing too late that his trusted guide had led him into hell. The forest didn't just swallow an army, it swallowed their stories, leaving only echoes in the rusted iron beneath our feet. Today, Calchris is a quiet place. Oaks tower over reconstructed ramparts where Germanic warriors once stood. But walk those paths at dusk, and you might still feel it, the weight of history pressing down, the whisper of leaves carrying voices from 2,000 years ago. Teutoburg wasn't just a battle. It was the moment an empire learned that some frontiers refused to be crossed, no matter how bright the eagles shine. The U.S.S. Indianapolis cut through the Pacific night on July 30th, 1945, its mission complete. Just days earlier, it had delivered the uranium core for Little Boy, the atomic bomb destined for Hiroshima, to the island of Tinian. Now, cruising unescorted toward the Philippines, the crew allowed themselves to relax. Most never saw the torpedoes coming. Japanese submarine I-58 struck just after midnight, hitting the Indianapolis with 2 devastating blows. The ship listed violently, its hull torn open like a tin can. Within 12 minutes, it slipped beneath the waves, taking 300 men down instantly. The remaining 900 spilled into the black water, clinging to life rafts, debris, or each other. Few had time to grab life jackets. Fewer still realized the nightmare had only begun. What followed was a slow unraveling of hope. The Navy, unaware the Indianapolis had sunk, failed to launch a search. For 4 days, the men drifted in groups scattered across miles of open ocean. The sun burned their skin raw. Thirst drove some to drink seawater, accelerating their delirium. At night, the sharks came, not just the occasional predator, but swarms drawn by the thrashing, the blood, the sheer abundance of prey. Survivors later described watching friends vanish beneath the surface with a sudden tug, hearing screams cut short by the dark water. Yet the horror wasn't just in nature's cruelty. It was in the missed chances. A Navy pilot flying overhead spotted the oil slick but dismissed it as unimportant. Another ship intercepted the I-58's attack report but assumed it was exaggerated. These weren't just oversights, they were cascading failures of a system that treated the Indianapolis as expendable. The rescue, when it finally came, was almost accidental. A patrol plane on a routine flight spotted men adrift by sheer luck. By then, only 316 survivors remained. Many died even as help arrived, their bodies too ravaged by exposure to recover. The captain, Charles McVeigh, would later be court-martialed, the only Navy captain in history punished for losing his ship to enemy action, despite evidence the Navy's own protocols had doomed him. What lingers about the Indianapolis isn't just the suffering. It's the stark lesson in how easily systems fail those who depend on them. These men had just helped end a war, yet their own chain of command abandoned them. Their story isn't just about survival against sharks or thirst. It's about the fragility of trust and the cost when that trust is broken. The ocean didn't just take lives that week, it exposed how thin the line between duty and disaster really is. And that's a truth far harder to swallow than salt water. The Flanan Isles lighthouse stood empty on December 26, 1900, its light extinguished, its keepers gone. When a supply ship finally reached the remote Scottish outpost after days of stormy delays, the crew found a scene that defied explanation. The kitchen table held a half-eaten meal of mutton stew and potatoes, long since spoiled. A chair lay toppled as if someone had risen in haste. The lighthouse logbook's final entry, scribbled in frantic handwriting, noted only, "Severe winds the likes of which I have never seen." But the most unsettling detail, the clock on the wall had stopped at exactly 8:45. Supernatural theories erupted like waves against the cliffs. Some whispered of vengeful sea spirits drawn to the lighthouse's lonely beam. Others swore the keepers had been snatched by a colossal rogue wave despite the lighthouse sitting 300 feet above the sea. The most persistent legend, that one keeper had gone mad, murdering his companions before throwing himself into the churning waters below. But the truth, as always, lies somewhere between the eerie and the ordinary. Modern investigators point to the island's geography as the real villain. The lighthouse perch on Eilean Moor, the largest of the Flanan Isles, was accessible only by a narrow, rain-slicked staircase cut into the cliffs. That December storm, with its 100-mile-per-hour winds, would have made routine maintenance deadly. Perhaps one keeper ventured out to secure equipment and slipped. The others, rushing to help, could have been swept away in seconds. The untouched meal suggests whatever happened, it happened fast, too fast for even a final log entry. Yet the mystery endures because of what we'll never know. No bodies were recovered, no distress signals were sent. The keepers Thomas Marshall, James Jucat, and Donald MacArthur left behind only questions. Their disappearance became a cautionary tale etched into maritime law. Lighthouses now require regular check-ins, and crews are never fewer than 4. The Flanan Isles didn't just claim 3 men. It exposed how fragile our systems are when faced with nature's whims. Today, the lighthouse still stands, automated and indifferent. Visitors who brave the crossing report an odd stillness, as if the island itself is holding its breath. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Not every mystery needs solving. Some stories are meant to linger in the fog, reminding us that even in our age of satellites and sensors, there are still places where the sea keeps its secrets and the past refuses to fade. Alexander the Great's final journey should have been as legendary as his life, a procession fit for the conqueror who toppled empires and reshaped the ancient world. Instead, his body became a pawn in a high-stakes game of power, stolen, fought over, and hidden so thoroughly that even now, 23 centuries later, we're still piecing together the clues. When he died in Babylon in 323 BC, feverish and just 32 years old, his generals faced a dilemma. How do you bury a man who was practically a god? The answer, it turned out, was anything but simple. His corpse was first embalmed in honey, a practice reserved for royalty, then placed in a golden sarcophagus so heavy it required a team of 64 mules to transport. But before it could reach his intended tomb in Macedonia, Ptolemy, one of Alexander's most cunning generals, intercepted the funeral cortege in Syria. Recognizing the political value of controlling the conqueror's remains, he diverted the body to Egypt, where it was enshrined in Memphis, then later moved to Alexandria. There, in a lavish mausoleum near the city's bustling harbor, Alexander's tomb became a pilgrimage site for emperors and explorers alike. Julius Caesar reportedly wept before it. Octavian, the future Augustus, accidentally broke off the mummy's nose while laying flowers. For centuries, the location was common knowledge until it wasn't. By the 4th century AD, the trail goes cold. Earthquakes, tsunamis, and shifting political tides erased Alexandria's landmarks. Some historians blame Christian riots that targeted pagan sites. Others point to rising sea levels submerging the ancient waterfront. Whatever the cause, the greatest mystery isn't just where Alexander's tomb went, it's how something so famous could vanish without a trace. Modern searches have turned Alexandria upside down. In 2021, a team scanning beneath the city's Mosque of Nabi Daniel found a strange void using ground-penetrating radar, a chamber lined with marble, just where ancient texts suggested the tomb might lie. Another theory places it in the oasis of Siwa, where Alexander famously consulted the oracle of Ammon, who supposedly confirmed his divine status. Then there's the wild card, Venice. A sarcophagus in the Basilica of St. Mark, long believed to hold the evangelist's relics, bears suspicious Macedonian motifs. Could medieval traders have mistaken Alexander's remains for the saints? The obsession isn't just about bones. Finding Alexander would rewrite history's map literally. His tomb was said to contain not just his body but treasures looted from Persia, India, and beyond, a time capsule of the ancient world's wealth. More than that, it's about closure for a man who never knew defeat in life yet remains lost in death. Archaeologists keep digging, not because they expect to find a skeleton crowned with gold, but because some legends refuse to stay buried. And maybe that's fitting. A conqueror who spent his life chasing horizons might prefer the mystery always just out of reach, eternal as the empires he built. The Viking settlement of Greenland wasn't just a frontier, it was a thriving hub of Norse life, a place where rugged farmers carved out existence in a land of glaciers and fjords. Established by Eric the Red in 985 AD, the colony grew to nearly 3,000 people at its peak, with stone churches, dairy farms, and even a bishopric. For over 4 centuries, these settlers clung to their European traditions, trading walrus ivory and polar bear pelts for iron and timber from Norway. Then, without warning, the entire colony vanished. By the mid-15th century, the last written record, a wedding certificate from 1408, was all that remained. When ships finally returned to Greenland's eastern settlements, they found only empty longhouses, their roofs collapsed under centuries of snow, and the bones of livestock scattered where they'd starved. Climate change likely delivered the first blow. Tree rings and ice cores reveal a creeping cold snap known as the Little Ice Age, which began in the 1300s. Summers grew shorter, winters harsher, and the already marginal farmland became impossible to cultivate. The Norse, stubbornly committed to their European ways, kept raising cattle, animals that required hay and shelter through brutal winters instead of adopting the Inuit practice of hunting seals and whales. Soil samples tell a grim story. As temperatures dropped, the settlers' pastures eroded, their grain yields dwindled, and their children's teeth show signs of malnutrition. Nature wasn't just turning against them, it was exposing the fragility of their imported way of life. Isolation sealed their fate. As Europe's economy shifted, Greenland's ivory trade lost value. The Black Death ravaged Norway, their lifeline to the outside world, and the last royal supply ship arrived in 1368. Cut off from reinforcements, the Norse faced a stark choice: adapt or perish. Yet archaeological evidence suggests they doubled down on tradition. In the settlement's final layers, researchers found elegant European-style clothing, and crucifixes luxuries in a place where survival should have meant pragmatism. Meanwhile, the Inuit thrived just miles away, their flexible diets and igloo building skills perfectly suited to the changing climate. The two groups left almost no evidence of interaction, as if cultural pride built walls higher than the glaciers. The parallels to modern environmental crises are impossible to ignore. Like the Greenland Norse, we often cling to unsustainable systems even as warning signs mount. Their story is a cautionary tale about the cost of inflexibility, how civilizations can collapse not from sudden catastrophe, but from 1,000 small refusals to change. Yet there's a twist. Recent DNA studies found that some Greenland settlers may have assimilated with the Inuit after all, their genetic legacy hidden in living descendants. If true, it means the colony didn't just vanish. It transformed, leaving behind not just empty houses but a question: when the world shifts beneath our feet, do we die with the old ways or find a path forward in the unknown? Greenland's silence holds that answer, waiting for us to listen. From frozen wastelands to dense jungles, these lost expeditions carve a map of human ambition, one marked by both triumph and tragedy. Each story we've followed, from the Arctic's icy grip to the Amazon's green shadows, reveals a universal truth: exploration is never just about reaching a destination. It's about the choices made when the plan falls apart, the bonds tested in isolation, and the quiet moments when a single decision, whether to turn back or press on, echoes through history. What unites these tales isn't just the mystery of disappearance, but the lessons left behind. Franklin's men, poisoned by their own supplies, teach us that even the best prepared expeditions can unravel when nature intervenes. Shackleton's relentless optimism shows how leadership can defy despair. The ancestral pueblones remind us that adaptation isn't failure, it's survival rewritten. These aren't just adventures, they're masterclasses in human ingenuity and humility. Yet the most haunting question lingers: what would we have done in their place? Would we have trusted the wrong guide like Fawcett, or rationed our last biscuit like the Donner Party? Would we have scribbled one final journal entry, knowing it might be our epitaph? These stories don't just belong to the past. They're mirrors, reflecting our own limits and resilience back at us. So as the dust settles on these forgotten journeys, their legacy isn't just in the artifacts left behind or the theories we debate. It's in the way they compel us to look at the blank spaces on our own maps, whether literal or metaphorical, and wonder what we'd risk to fill them in. Because exploration, at its core, isn't about conquering the unknown. It's about the courage to step into it, knowing you might not return the same. Now we turn to you. Which of these stories gripped you the tightest? Was it the eerie silence of the Flanan Isles or the desperate calculus of the Karluk survivors? Drop your thoughts below. We're all part of this conversation, just as every explorer is part of a chain stretching back to the first footprints in the sand. And if you're hungry for more tales where history and mystery collide, hit that subscribe button. The next adventure is always just beyond the horizon. Until then, stay curious, stay bold, and maybe, just maybe, double-check your supplies before